as we go on. But yeah, Katja, you can start the recording. No niin, oikein hyvää huomenta kaikille ja tervetuloa Nordic Hubin webinaarin Tanskan tie menestykseen klusterityössä. En riktigt god morgon till alla och välkomna till Nordic Hubs webbinarium Den danska vägen till klusterframgång. And now I will switch to English. Welcome everybody to the Nordic Hub webinar with the topic The Road to Danish Cluster Success. My name is Christian Schrey and I am the CEO of Viexpo and I will be moderating this webinar today. And as you may know, Viexpo is coordinating the Nordic Hub, where our primary goal is to build more cooperation between the Nordic countries. And through the Nordic Hub, we want to create a platform for clusters to focus on development and collaboration. And of course, we want to team up with our Nordic partners to create new cross-border development projects and boost innovation through proactive ecosystem thinking. And I recently read that according to a report made by McKinsey & Company, 30% of all value creation will happen in ecosystems as early as 2025. So the question, of course, is for us that how do we make sure that we are doing the right things in our clusters going forward, not to miss out on these fantastic opportunities. And could more collaboration between clusters also increase trade, for example, between Denmark and Finland? And could it also lead to boosting exports from the Nordic towards the EU and the rest of the world? So this is why it's so great that we have the pleasure to invite two excellent guests to give us a lot of insights regarding today's topic and cluster collaboration in general. Our first speaker today will be Meredith Nielsen, the Director for Cluster Excellence Denmark and the President for TCI Network. I think it's safe to say that Denmark has been the frontrunner when it comes to cluster collaboration in the Nordics for a long time. So it will be a great to hear what we can learn from them and also hear her thoughts on Nordic cluster collaboration going forward. And our second speaker is Susanne Baden-Jørgensen. She is working as a senior international manager at the Food and Bio Cluster Denmark. She has a really long experience working internationally, both with company export promotion, cross-border cooperation within EU, and most recently, of course, focusing on clusters. And as the food and bio sector is really important for us in Finland as well, I'm really looking forward to hearing how companies and organizations can benefit from working together as a cluster. And of course, towards the end, we have reserved some time for Q&A and some conclusions. And reminder of that questions can be asked through the Teams chat, and questions can be also be asked in Finnish and Swedish if you want to. Voitte siis esittää kysymyksiä myös suomeksi chatissa, ni kan alltså ställa frågor i chatten även på svenska. And it's also a good idea to network during this webinar. So if you, for example, want to share your LinkedIn profile in the chat, that is okay. And hopefully we get a lot of questions from our speakers so we can have a great discussion on today's topic. And please, we ask you that you keep your microphone muted and camera switched off during the webinar to avoid overload. And again, a reminder that the webinar is being recorded. But let's now start focusing on today's topic, and I will invite our first speaker, Meredith. Here you go, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Christian, for the kind introduction, and thank you, Katja and Christian, for inviting me for this great webinar. It's great to be back in Finland, in the Nordics, and I'm sure we have so much to share and also learn from each other. So I can only underline what Christian just said, that please be active in the chat or reach out to me also on LinkedIn afterwards. So it's an honor to share a bit what we've been doing in Denmark. So I'll focus a bit on that and try to underline a bit what others could learn from our 10-12 years journey of working with clusters in Denmark and also around the world. And Katja will help me a bit with share the presentation. So You can go ahead for the next one. So instead of waiting till the bitter end, I will start with the core learnings, so you can get that straight away. We have several, of course. So one really core learning is that we can see clusters matter. It was great to hear Christian mentioning another report, but we can see that clusters really move forward as innovators and transformators of the challenges we face today. Part of that journey is then understanding what is a cluster. It can sound a bit boring, but it's quite an important journey, and it's quite important to do a bit of an exercise of what is it and what isn't it. Then what we really learned in Denmark over the later years is that cluster governance matters, cluster leadership matters. So really having a strong CEO, having a strong board, having a very clear organization around your ecosystem have a big impact on the cluster you run. Then, of course, having a cluster policy makes a difference. Those policies come in many different forms and shapes, so the clusters are there. So if you have a good policy, you can really make a difference in helping those clusters to grow a lot. And then, as Christian also mentioned, having reports, having different kinds of measurements for documenting the impact and the value of clusters, and also showing that to the outside world, so even more understands that what is clusters all about, and then can engage with that. And then a final learning is this on cluster partnerships, that clusters should join forces, for instance, in Nordic Hub or in other places, and really think about ways of moving the innovation agenda forward. Because there's a huge potential here, and this is where clusters really have a unique position. Then you also need to think a little bit about what kind of tools do you need to get going. So you might need an overall plan, you might need a strategy, either national or regional, you might need to have a cluster call, you need to think about funding schemes, then you need to think about some kind of ongoing development of cluster policy. Then you might need some kind of support scheme. Clustercase Denmark is just one example. There's the big also Go Cluster program in Germany, or for instance in the new Nordic Hub here, where you can also use this as an area for supporting your activities and understanding what is basically happening in your area. Then in Denmark we really use this cluster labeling scheme a lot, the ESCA, bronze, silver and gold for the cluster excellence. So that's also a tool for professionalization and development. So on the next slide, we can see that clusters are not just something we talk about in Denmark or in the Nordics. It's really a global phenomenon. We have a very strong European tradition of clusters. I think we estimate right now we have around 2,500 cluster organizations in Europe, and especially in the Nordics, many regions and states work with cluster policy, and it goes back almost 20 years. We can see that now is really an integrated part of the business and innovation policy. Perhaps Finland, for many years, you were one of the front runners, and it's perhaps an area for you also to consider how can you join the race again, because this is really what we see other Nordic countries are very strong in. But clusters are all over the world. Some are more business-led when we go outside Europe. Some are also led more by public authorities, where there's a need for the public sector to take a lead, or in some cases it's researchers organizing business networks around the research areas. So some might use the cluster term, some might not. But for me, it's not that using the cluster word that is the most important thing. It is actually if you organize your efforts in a cluster-like manner. But we can really see, I call it mushrooming. It's an area that really grows, and it grows a lot. So on the next slide, one of the main reasons for why clusters really matters is that so many of the challenges we have, we call them the challenges of tomorrow. They really demand new ways of collaborating and new business model. And no single company or municipality, organization or university can solve those future challenges alone. So we really need to bridge together. We can call it clusters or networks or partnerships, but really having a joint platform where you can work together and address those challenges because basically no sole actor can really handle those challenges on your own. For us, another important element is that the clusters should be neutral. So you're not a lobby organization, you're not a branch organization, you're considered a neutral platform where all partners and stakeholders can meet each other and start collaboration. So going for the next slide, of course, spending a little bit of time on definitions. And for me, this is working with clusters is, I think, not a textbook exercise, but it's really good also, of course, to visit the historic journey on this and address what did Michael Porter said, what is Christian Kettle's research looked into, and just summarizing a bit on the journey. So going back with Michael Porter, in those days, it was a lot about, being close to each other in proximity, in physical proximity. And then with Christian Kettle's work, there was more focus on the cluster initiatives, where on this, do we organize the efforts to increase growth and competitiveness? And then Christian Range's work from 2019 saying, but the initiatives are important, the organizations are important, but we need to think about building in more stakeholders. And he talked a lot about bringing in entrepreneurs and capital elements. So coming from a lot about the proximity in terms of geography, then moving into cluster initiatives, and then thinking about even more complex systems, pentagon models, not just triple helix models, but pentagon models where you really build in more stakeholders in the cluster. So this was also a starting point for us in Denmark, and back in early 2010, we estimated that we had around 180 clusters and networks and whatever, basically. And we thought, okay, we actually need some kind of basic criteria to start working with this on a more professional level. So back in those days, 10, 11 years ago, we started this, we call it a Danish cluster catalog, so to have some kind of basic mapping of what kind of stakeholders are we looking for. The clusters wanted to be part of the cluster catalog, needed to fulfill 3 basic criteria. So it's a lot about building a knowledge bridge, because that's been one of the challenges we face in Denmark. That's many barriers between the company side and the research side. It also, at that point, needed to be a triple helix organization. Then we also need to have this formally established organization. So we actually had people in place that could really work and lead the cluster organization. And then you should have a minimum of 20 committed participants from private companies. And then a valid label. I think in Denmark we've done around 140 or 50 labels because the clusters it's an ongoing thing to do those label processes. And it's still today an integrated part. Our leading clusters now, they need to have a gold label. So we used that cluster catalog for many years. At that point, that helped us to define around 40 clusters. Those clusters were in the target group for Cluster Excellence Denmark, but we could also see other clusters around, more privately funded, or perhaps not paying so much attention to what the public, focus of the clusters. But the cluster catalog created like a baseline for us, who is in the target group, and then we actually had, organizations that we could work together with and move this cluster agenda forward with. So the next slide is, so where we are today is that the role of clusters and the perception of clusters today is that it is really this neutral platform, and that should be the DNA of clusters, to organize multiple stakeholders. It goes today way beyond the triple helix. It is a lot about fostering transition and innovation in its SMEs. So clusters today in all our sectors work with digitalization, sustainable transition, Industry 4.0. And it is a core task for the clusters to foster transition and support SMEs innovation. And then it's about creating impact. I'll come back to in a moment how we measure that, but access to new knowledge, upgrading skills, access to new innovation, finding more finance and capitals, getting into new markets, and also collaborating with partners nationally and globally. So on the next slide, this is the Danish history. So our first program started back in 2003. We're not the first one in the Nordics to have a cluster-like program, but those programs were a lot about creating regional growth. And some of those clusters are actually still around and being built into the current cluster scheme. Then we had some high-tech centers, actually quite inspired by the Finnish case about nanotechnology. And then in 2008, we had the first innovation network program funded by our ministry, and more formalized regional clusters. Then this support function that I worked with, NetMatch, started in 2009. I also collaborated with Susanne back in those days. And then Clustercase Denmark continued our work and is still in operation. And today now we have 10 superclusters that all focus on our national strengths, and we have also 4 clusters in our emerging areas. So this is a bit our story in one timeline. So on the next slide, then some of you might think about, okay, what is the Clustercase Denmark all about? So actually I was part of starting the whole thing because I did an analysis for one of the ministries saying, yeah, but in order to really move this innovation agenda forward, to really make this matchmaking happening, you need some kind of support mechanism. And today we're now co-funded by 2 ministries supporting the National Cluster Program. We have a steering group by the 2 ministries that set our direction. We just got new funding, so we are quite happy about that. At least for 1 more year, so let's see. The current focus is a lot about consolidation. So there's been a big effort on bringing, having fewer clusters and again, even more professional clusters. And then a little bit of what our efforts go into is on internationalization. But everything we do is coordinated with the clusters. So we really talk to them every day. We do also today a lot of webinars. We do a lot of one-on-one dialogues. We have now today a cluster management group where we meet several times a week. Sometimes we have put in place task forces on specific topics, or we have more thematic experience exchange groups on communication or internationalization, or what is basically the need in the clusters. So, and what we're really working on now is all the related policy areas to clusters, on scale-up initiatives, on even more on internationalization. So we really try to go outside the normal cluster focus now. But everything we do is quite on hands, it's very practical, it's very flexible. We don't do a lot of reporting, sorry to say that. We do have some on our homepage, also a bit in English, but we're not asked to fill in a lot of reports. So on the next slide, just briefly on our this reform we've been going through, we had a McKinsey report actually underlining that clusters is a super efficient tool, but it analyzed our whole business and innovation system. There was a focus on too many clusters. We need to bring that down. We need to align better with a smart specialization strategy for Denmark. And all of that was put in place in this law of business promotion support, where actually clusters really played a prominent role. So that was good for us. We have now an external board giving advice to the Ministry of Industry. And they outlined this national smart specialization strategy. That strategy was then tested with, in many regional workshops, in dialogue with many stakeholders to really, okay, did we get the analysis right? Where are the strongholds? How can we develop this further? And then Clustercase Denmark, together with the cluster ecosystem, spent quite a while on consolidating. The food and bio cluster really worked great. That's the case later on, but we really consolidate the ecosystems and not just the organization. So we really try to build in the ecosystems in this new cluster, 14 new super clusters, as we call them, that just has started their work here 1st of January 21. So on the next slide, going a little bit deeper on this importance of the governance. So we know We always known for many years that the cluster managers are important, the cluster organization, but really having a strong governance in place, having independent cluster organizations, we can see they perform better. So having own legal structure, having a business-dominated board, having business-dominating steering group, having a chairman or chairwoman coming from the private sector. The strategic level is also very important, so it should be the highest possible level. So you want the best ones from the universities or the RTOs, and not like just a normal professor, but really having like the leading ones in the respective sector. We can also see an increase in professionalism in the clusters. So it's going from being the cluster manager, having perhaps more focus on facilitation and, management and matchmaking, but then now having very strong CEOs really pushing forward like a more strategic domain thinking for the cluster, and also positioning the cluster much stronger in the overall business and innovation system. On average, the secretariats now are around 15 FTEs. We have some few ones that are around 50, but in general quite big cluster organizations, and also quite big clusters. So on average, they cover around 250 companies, and in total have a big ecosystem around 400 stakeholders coming from knowledge institution, investors, entrepreneurs. So from this very scattered, competing, overlapping system, so now hopefully to a more lean system with quite big clusters. And I must say, I think for now we have around more or less some of the biggest clusters in the world now. On the next slide, just give a brief. So these are the new Stronghold clusters that aligns with our smart specialization strategy. You can go to Clustercase Denmark homepage and see more on. I think somebody needs to get unmuted. Thank you. So these are the 10 Stronghold clusters, and you can read more about them on our homepage and get directly into their new homepages as well. So some of them are, of course, under construction. And on the next page, you can see our emerging clusters. Some might think they are super young, but actually some of them, our Sensec, our defense clusters, go back to the 50s. Sound cluster is also quite old. Vision Denmark is a small cluster, but actually been also an old cluster in Denmark. So it's just because they are smaller that they are called emerging clusters. It's not because they are blooming as the picture shows. But of course they're blooming, but it's not like they're very, very young. Yes, on the next slide, just giving you look into what the machinery in the clusters is all about. So we call about this innovation power of clusters. Many of those activities today are now digitalized. So this is really something the clusters been doing for the last year. The classical services in the clusters are about innovation projects. It's about matchmaking. It's about dissemination of knowledge and competence development. Then over the years, we could see that more and more clusters became very active on internationalization. So this also led to Clustercase Denmark becoming more international, and us doing like more global cluster matchmaking or reaching out to other clusters in the Nordics and in Europe and around the world. And then on the topics on transformation, qualified labor force, program operators are new areas that the clusters have been moving into over the later years. Because when you have the organization in place, then more and more tasks are being put on top of what is already being doing. And we can see some of the clusters currently quite strong on big national projects on digitalization, on circular economy, and actually leading those agendas in some of their sectors. And then coming to the end of my presentation, I would just like to go into the importance of impact and measuring impact, because while it might be a bit difficult to show what a cluster is, then we have really measured this back and forward in Denmark many, many times. Some of those analyses are also on our homepage, some of those also in English. But we can see that companies in clusters are 4 times more innovative compared to similar companies outside clusters. We can see that the companies also become more productive, and we can also see they become more international. We don't just do the analysis, we also need to try to show the impact. It's not the biggest things we do in Cluster Access Denmark, but it's something we do together with the clusters. So this film you can see here is one we did together with the clusters. We basically asking some of the cluster members to join and show what is the value of cluster. And so we also try to brand our cluster community and show the impact. But I can only recommend to have an impact indicator system in place and also measure over many years, because then you can track the progress, but also get some insights in where you might need to develop your system even further. Yes, and on the final slide, then on this global, on the cluster partnerships, it's super nice that the Nordic Hub are now a new TCI member, so that's nice. We do have a history in TCI. We actually did have a conference here in 2009 in Jyskelainen, and this I know actually led to more clusters being inspired to run cluster programs in the Baltic area. But I think also a way of joining forces, learning from others, matchmaking, networking, and building up more international connections, and hopefully this can also bring your program to the next level. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Meredith. What a great presentation you have, and I do feel that we have learned a lot more already. Let me just give a quick question to you about these measurements and communicating this as for us as well, and I think for many as the listeners also. We are also a partly government-funded organization, and how we communicate the value that we create as organization and as companies in general is really important. You in one of the last slides you had impact and how you communicate that. How important would you say that is as both as an organization and company, that you can tell that story, how you provide value to the ecosystems and clusters?
I think it's super important, and I know that some of the big analysis is also some of the clusters have been, doing, using in their promotion of the clusters. Some of the clusters even do their own impact analysis, also do surveys and follow up. I mean, is it working what we are doing? Are the companies happy? And also part of a learning circle, how can we adjust our services, or do we need to provide new things? So I think really having a consistent system in place, using indicators, and go more for need to know and not nice to have, because when you start measuring, you want to know everything. That's not a good idea. So try to keep it simple. In Denmark, it was also part of that, there is a big competition around, okay, we have the best system, this is helping the SMEs in the best way. So to really show the value of clusters compared to universities or RTOs or other schemes in place, then you need to have some kind of documentation. And since clusters is not that we know what it is all about, but for others it's a new thing. So we need to show the impact. We also did a lot of case stories over the years, also something we do in TCI, because the cases are just super strong. It really is much better than just showing a number. So having numbers, having showing the impact, but also having cases, companies raising their hands saying, yeah, but this cluster helped me going into the market in Japan, or they helped me innovate this new surface coverage so I can produce my things better or cheaper. So these kind of stories are also very important, and to bring them into the news or to share them in the local community. So it's not like just, us in the small cluster world knowing all about this, but really sharing those stories to the broader community, because we can just see that so many are working on a cluster basis. I mean, making those partnerships, bringing in so many stakeholders. So to avoid too much competition and to really, support the ones that are already in place and to help build more. I think then the whole journey of measuring and showing impact is super important.
Thank you, Meredith. And we also got one question from Mari regarding the super clusters and if they get public funding.
Yeah.
Susanne also commented that they do, that they are co-financed, but maybe you would also like to comment on that.
Yeah, they do get a lot of funding, and it's not it's quite a huge amount. So for the 14 clusters, they don't get the same because some of them are quite strong and some are not so strong, but it's a 4-year funding scheme. It's around 100 million euros for 4 years. So it's, but we recommend, and this is again part of the independent cluster journey, that the clusters do have other funding sources. And it's a mixture normally of other funding from other ministries, funding from still regions, even though the regions don't support clusters anymore. Then it's a lot of municipality funding. Then it's also private funding, and then some EU or international funding coming from Cosmo, Horizon. Yeah. So, and we really recommend this model. So don't rely on one funding stream, because you never know when politicians make up their mind in a different way. So in order to run a sustainable, independent cluster organization, really work with your business model. Actually, in TCI, we have a webinar later today on this topic of keep on working with, upgrading cluster excellence, think about new business models, because you cannot depend on, and also having your own strategy, not just a strategy the ministry is following, but having a own cluster strategy following wherever, you want to go in the food sector or in digital sector or in the green transition sector. So again, for us, the learning on this cluster governance, setting up a strong board, having your own strategy developed with your own stakeholders is also very important.
Very good. Thank you, Meredith. And also we have a good question from Veli-Matti Hettula. What do you think, Meredith, that Danish clusters could learn from the Finnish clusters?
Yeah, or many things. I think back in the days, we always just looked at Finland. I mean, so to be inspired by the Finnish cluster program and also how you work with. So basically, the technology networks I showed you were more or less modeled by the Finnish way. Because you were strong in nanotechnology in those days, and we needed to be the same in Denmark. I think what we can learn is also how open you've been over the years. So perhaps you might be a bit away from Central Europe, but you still have a very international profile. So I think this is also something we learned a lot from our Nordic colleagues and from the Finnish clusters, that don't close yourself, but be open and collaborate with clusters in other countries. That's also a learning we took from you.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Meredith. I think now we have a good question from Seppo also, but I think we will come back to that later. Hope that's okay, Seppo, with you. I would like now to give the floor to our next presenter as well. Thank you so much, Meredith, and then we'll continue discussion afterwards. But I think it's now it's time to give the floor to Susanne. You're welcome, Susanne, and please go ahead and share your screen.
Yes, I will share my screen. Thank you, Meredith, for a very great journey. It's almost going back in history, and we worked together since a long time. So just let me hang on a moment. So. This is what always happened. I just had it, let me just check. Patient, I guess.
And now here is Susanne.
Yeah, just going to the very front. So, and presentation mode. Can you see it now?
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation to present a supercluster. This is all very new to us. We started only January 1st, but we have been a long way. I'm going to talk during this 20 minutes about our background, objectives, the facts, members, why should a company or university be a member of a cluster, innovation, networks, and internationalization. I will also talk a lot about the topics that Meredith also mentioned, and just to sort of support what she said. So, Food and Biocluster Denmark, we are the national cluster organization for the Danish food and bioresource industry. So we are a unifying platform for innovation and growth for the national, Danish and the international companies and knowledge institution. If you want the story, we were actually 4 clusters, important food and bio clusters in Denmark. And when the new program was introduced, then we knew either we could compete or we could join forces. So we chose to join forces and applied to become one of the super clusters. And we were granted the status of being a super cluster by the Danish agency or the ministries, as you can see, and what Meredith also said. But it would, with strong collaboration from the Danish Agriculture and Food Council and the Confederation of Danish Industries. So we had some of the major organization, even though they're a trade organization, but they supported us, but also the major Danish universities and research and knowledge institution. So the whole cluster world was together. But before I go on, I would like to start also by sort of stressing what the last slide that Meredith had, that the impact, just imagine 4 times are companies more likely to innovate if they're in a cluster. 3.6% have a growth in the productivity, and normally only 5 to 6 Danish SMEs are internationally active. But if they're in a cluster, 40% are more active. So just imagine the potential if more joined the cluster. So it's a win-win situation, both for the policymakers, for the companies, for members, and for the clusters themselves, of course. And I would also just like to credit the Cluster Excellence Denmark, because there are huge support to all the clusters and have been throughout the whole cluster journey. They are sort of the spokesperson for the clusters and for the ministry. So they're sort of bridging the clusters and the ministries, so all are intact. All right, the objectives of Food and Biocluster Denmark. We are, of course, to maximize the innovation within the food and bioresource sector in Denmark. We would like to see ourselves as the meeting point of the industries, but of course also the academy, the universities, the knowledge institution, but most of all also accelerate the business and market development of the companies, and being the unifying cluster organization that would create synergies and initiative tomorrow's sustainable solution. Meredith told about or informed about the digitalization, the transition for more sustainable solution, and of course Industry 4.0. This is all areas that are our focus areas as well. But we would like, a super cluster have to be ambitious. So we would like to maintain our international leading position within innovation. We want to be one of the very renowned clusters within this industry in the world. Nonetheless, in the world. I know, I'm joking a little bit. We're just starting our journey. But like Meredith said, we cover the entire value chain from the bioresource to the bio-based raw material to production, food, ingredients, distribution, quality assurance, and the food to the consumers. And just a little bit fact about us. We are 35 employees. We have 6 offices where, as a, I wouldn't say new, but with the Pentagon model, we have incubators, hubs, where companies, small entrepreneurs, startups are actually situated in 3 of our offices. One in Copenhagen, in Aarhus, if you know, in the second largest city in Denmark, and then by Viborg in the middle of Jutland. We have 43, at this moment, 43 projects. I will get more into that to support our innovation and collaboration. And at the moment, we started January 1st, but we already had over 100 events and offers to our members. And I think will be more than 200 by the end of the year. Just to give you a brief structure of our organization at this moment, and I can add to what Meredith said, we are co-funded by the ministries. We have a lot of projects that's co-funding us as well, or paying our wages, so to speak, and the benefit to the members, of course. But we just introduced a member fee, which is a bit I wouldn't say shock therapy, but for some of the members in the other old organization, they were a little struggling to get them on board in the new cluster, but it's going well. And I think it's impressive that 277, just to be correct, have signed up, and they're not paying the same fee. If you're a big company, you pay more. And if you're a small startup, you pay less, of course. So it's a difference. But there are some international companies, you probably know Arla and Danish Crown, ABB, but we also have small companies and universities and organizations in general. So what do we do? What are we offering our members? Well, of course, we are to enhance innovation. So we are sort of a bridge builder between the academic and the companies in order to create more a new innovative products, services, or research project. How do we do it? We do it by having a lot of inspirational talk, events. We have networking in the sense that we have professional networks, and I will introduce you to that in the next slide, sort of sub-networks, networks within our cluster. Collaboration is, of course, the key word. They have access to research, expertise, and funding. And we have a number of collaboration projects, innovation projects that are encouraging and foster these collaboration. Then we have online knowledge sharing. And in these days where everything is online, we have a number of webinars, masterclasses, online, of course, and global insights, innovation food talks, and I could go on. But we also have a one-to-one sparring or guidance with the companies or knowledge institution. And then we matchmake other companies and knowledge institutions. So that's sort of the overall what we also do. So to come back to the networks that we have established at the moment 6 networks: sustainable packaging, green protein, food safety, kitchen hygiene, food waste, insect, seafood, and we are talking about vertical farming is a hot topic at the moment, but also sales. When you come back to business, it's also important to have sales, and also in this changing world, I think the COVID-19 will change the way we do business as well. So who are in these networks for? There's entrepreneur, corporations, big, small, researchers, SMEs. So they're in the network. It's voluntary, of course, but this is where they gain the knowledge and foster also future collaboration. And what do? They zoom in on the challenge and possibilities in the topic. And the topics they decide usually themselves. It can be technical the aspects, it can be consumer behavior, taste, regulation, trends, and so on. It's the group itself that usually decide. And normally we would aim to have 4 times a year a meeting, and with these digital times, most likely 50% will be digital and then physical, so they also meet. But you have to be international. We have to have an international strategy, and so we have. And we help our members to find international innovation, business, and project partners. And by doing that, they have access to international matchmaking, innovation focused or business focused or project focused matchmaking events, and also funding. We involve them in project funding on international level as well, but also networks. You may have heard of European Cluster Collaboration Platform or the European Cluster Association. We are involved in these many networks, and also the bio-based industries. We're in the board, the steering board there. So we have a lot of networks where the members can benefit for us from being that we are a member. And of course, the one-to-one sparing with the strongest food and bioresource ecosystem in the world. We like to say that. And with the Danish innovation centers, there are, I don't know, maybe 8 of them. There used to be 8 of them in the world. And together with them, we sort of organize international booth camps. So we take a group of companies or members, and the innovation centers around the world are organizing a booth camp so they can be stronger on the market. To give you a few examples of the national innovation projects, they are digitalization in the SME, the transition of all the digitalization with the SME, the sustainable food packaging solution, micro-L, insect for food. You can use insects in food, measuring of quality and taste in the meat and the fish, kitchen hygiene, and a little cute starfish, how you can use that in the food production as well. But we have a huge international EU project portfolio. So here are some of them. Agrobioheat is to enhance the use of agrobiomass. That can be in Spain, where they have wine use the branches from the wine production to the heating. We have also gone into looking more, helping SMEs to attract investment. So we have this Empower Bio, where we help SMEs to go through a business program to help them to overcome the valley of death. And that's just to show you some of them. We have a number and still in the pipeline. And then I would like to highlight one of our major EU projects, so to speak. It is Enterprise Europe Network. I know Satu and Mari from the Finnish network is here. It's a institution, more or less. It's a network of the world's largest network of international business support, but they are established by the EU Commission way back in 2008. And already in 2010, the clusters were buzzword, and I've been working within the network with the cluster expertise. We have an internal network group, and I'm the chair of this. So if you have any question, then please go ahead. But mainly it's for SMEs to help them find collaboration partners and innovation and growth and internationalization. That would be a whole new topic, so I'm just going to skip to it. But also another program is innovation. This is a one-to-one where you the companies are offered a one-to-one journey for innovation where they take it from A to Z. It's a very popular program. But now we are looking at the new call from the EU Commission that were just published yesterday. So of course, as transition, we'll be working more with the digitalization and sustainability. So it's going to be interesting to see what the new call would be. And for your information, there are a number of local offices of Enterprise Europe Network in Finland, but also in another 64 countries. So it's very useful in what we do for our members. So this is the question, why should I be a member of the cluster? Well, being in a cluster, the benefit will be that you have one entry to innovation, competences that can help accelerate the business, free access to relevant networks, the collaboration projects, national or international, access to funding and visibility, and of course, one-to-one business advisory service. And here you can see on the blue, this is not just something that we said. Some of our members, a small company said, and it also underlined what Meredith said, that the fast-paced development means that we can no longer stand alone. We need to think beyond for our own needs. So the need to be in a cluster to benefit from what the world is raising towards new innovation and technology and transition. But also it can be a game changer because sometimes companies, they don't know what they need. So a bigger network, new collaborative partners, and the latest industry insight. You can get that from being a member of a cluster. And this is said by one of another member. It's a game changer, and they gained access to many international opportunities. And then one of the member, Nestle, also said they're a huge, large company, but they benefit from being in a cluster with smaller companies because they have less, what could you say, the transition and from action to strategy to action is shorter, the way is shorter. So I think all can benefit from being in a network, and standing together is better than being alone. So I would say being in a cluster is a gateway to innovation. If you have a good idea, we help you grow. And like I mentioned in the beginning, the winner it's a win-win situation. 4 times more are companies likely to innovate if they're in a cluster. The productivity is higher. The number of SMEs that are more internationally active is it's more than double. So what's not to like? So by these words, I have to admit, I made a Google translation. So I don't know, Kitos, well, I leave it to you, but say thank you for your attention. And these are my contacts. And if you want to know more, I would say, we need to show our success stories. So we actually enhanced and powered our communication department. We hired a new communication officer. So now we have 3 newsletters, and one is international. And if you want to subscribe the link is here. And we're on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we even have our own TV channel. And so what's not to like? So thank you again for your attention.
And thank you so much, Susanne, for a great presentation. It seems like you have a really great cluster with a lot of case going on. Super interesting to hear about this. And we have had a lot of activity also now in the chat, and Meredith has been also kind enough to answer some of the questions directly there in the chat. But I would like to thanks, Meredith, also for turning on your camera back on and joining us in the discussion. I want to go back to the question that we got from Seppo just before Susanne's presentation. And I think this is a very good question, because when we see in both company and clusters, we see the benefits from being innovative, getting new ideas, but we also see the possible benefit on increased exports, increased degree of internationalization. So Seppo's question was that, are there any plans to have Nordic clusters, for example, to enter together to developing emerging countries? Would you like to comment on these first?
You wanted Susanne to go first or me? Christian, I didn't.
About Meredith, please, if you want to go first.
Yeah. Okay, no worries, because I know Food and Bio Cluster also been super active, and actually they have an ambition of being the world leading food cluster. So just letting you know out there that they have very high ambitions. So yeah, but as I wrote in the chat, I mean, I think we do see a lot of efforts in those areas. We see over part of the journey, the 20 years journey, is that many clusters, have experimented in different ways of, either setting up a cluster hub in another country, collaborating with a cluster-like initiative, sharing, insights and learnings, and doing different kinds of projects together, some more innovative projects, some more business-related projects. But I also think it's an area where we can do more, because I think, and it follows a little bit what both Susanne and I underlined, the company feedback we're getting, we cannot solve this alone. So in order to really be also more international, go into new markets, I think in general, many SMEs will need more preparation at home. This is where clusters and enterprise youth network and other players come into, because a normal SME is not ready to go international. And then clusters together with partners can take those companies, to, especially foreign markets are more difficult, developing countries are even more difficult, so they will need support on that journey. But I think there's a huge potential to explore this more. The Commission is doing a lot. Now clusters and enterprise youth network is in the same department in the Commission.
Me too.
But I think also on the national level, we can discuss more with our foreign ministries. How can we set up more and better programs to really use the cluster tools as a better way to support SMEs, and perhaps make, how can we better enter new, more difficult markets across, overseas, but also in developing countries. So I think there's a huge discussion ahead of us. But I think we have so many good stories, as I also tried to write in the chat, on how clusters have been doing that, even during the pandemic last year, where we talked about, no, globalization is off, nobody, we don't need that anymore. We just need to collaborate with ourselves. I mean, not true at all. We saw the clusters being very active, as Susanne just told you, being very digital, kept on, and even attracted more investments, because they, did international brokerage events or investor events, and and it just worked. I mean, basically, but I think on the policy level, there could be more done to support the clusters on the journey.
Very good. Susanne, do you want to comment also?
Yes, I would like to say we've missed Finland in our cluster families. So please come back to us, because we do a number of international projects that we include Swedish and Norwegian, and of course we would love to have you on board as well. We scout all the time for new collaboration partners. And I have to, maybe I'm a little bit not biased, but the Enterprise Europe Network helped a lot. So we organize cluster missions where we take the company, the clusters, to a certain market. It could also be for innovation, but also for export and innovation, and it could be matchmaking events. I'm an expert in doing online matchmaking events, so it is working. And I know from Cluster Excellence Denmark, they have a number of international cluster matchmaking events where I think it was a must to be at these events in the past. And the funding, I think we should try to contact the Nordic Council. is it the Nordic Council? Yes. They funded Nordic collaborations, and maybe they could have another look at see what we can do together. But definitely Horizon Europe is coming up. There are a lot of, cluster project and calls that will be available. So we should look into a closer collaboration. And I hope with you entering again or renewing, or you always been there. It's not like you've not been there. Be more active, and we welcome that. Yes.
Coming back in again with new energy for sure.
Exactly.
Thank you. Good answers to this question, and then thank you, Seppo, for a really good question for a good discussion here, because I do feel that regardless of field, the challenge for the SMEs usually going into exports is that they have their one solution or one product that they are promoting, but usually you need a tailor-made solution to kind of get a hold of these challenges that they have today. So you have to have a bigger solution, and usually then you have to go into your own cluster, you have to go into your ecosystem and find a partner that can provide that solution for you. And I think as the Nordics, we can not only look into our own network in our own country, but we should always also look cross-border to find a partner to create the best possible world-class solution. So this is something that we as Nordic Hub will be promoting very, very heavily going forward, of course, together with you and the other Nordic partners. And also we have from Risto also questions regarding the IPR issues. I think we also got some good answers. Thank you, Meredith, for answering in the chat as well to that. And also Satu raised a question. Satu raised a question about the status of the supercluster. What kind of criteria are there, or what is the process regarding that?
Yes, I'm sorry, I only have a link in Danish, but I put in the link so you can read about the full program and everything. So Google Translate might help you a bit on that. But so the call was out last summer, and of course it was an open competition. But the idea was it shouldn't really be an open competition, because we really wanted the current cluster landscape to, So the ambition was to consolidate and help the existing ecosystems, because all the nice impact we built over so many years, we really feared it would be lost if it was, a range of new stakeholders applying for the cluster program. So we can see it's in general the same people, because it's also a people thing. So like Susanne, been in the game for many years, has a huge network. But we also see more new and stronger CEOs coming in, and I think it's also really be good for the clusters. So basically, overall, the new clusters should, be the leading in their sector. They should also work with digitalization and green transition and internationalization. And then there were some specific criteria, on the assessment of each of, the cluster applications. And actually, those action plans are still being negotiated. So it's a journey. Susanna knows this for sure. So. I think they're almost approved now, but that's also part of, really deciding on what are the specific actions in the clusters. I hope that kind of responded.
Yeah, thank you so much for the good answer on that, and thank you also to the audience now for being active in the chat and with good questions. And I like the comment also that we got from Paula, that I think it's noted both in the Nordics and in Finland that we can step up our game when it comes to cluster collaboration here. And this is also, of course, a job that we are doing as a team here on the Finnish side. We need to be better into communicating and lobbying towards the government as well regarding this. And of course, this is great that we have the support from you here in the Nordics as well. And I also think going forward on a Nordic level, also coming together, having a strong voice, getting out the same message there as well. I think this will do wonders for all of us going forward. But we are already out of time. We've gone a little bit over time. Sorry for that to everybody, but it was a super interesting webinar. Thank you so much, Susanne and Meredith, for being with us today and sharing your stories. I'm sure that in due time we will have to come back to you as well at some point. But please, to the audience, thank you also for listening today. Please reach out to our dear speakers if there are any ideas on collaboration, and we will also, of course, move forward with new topics to discuss and new ways to network and collaborate cross borders. So thank you once again, and we'll be in touch with everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.